Okay, now that we have seen the frequency distribution on the monthly total returns for the S&P 500, now let's take a look at the histogram of monthly returns. And with the histogram, we can get most of the information that we got from the table, but visually. So the first thing that we noticed is this, long, tall bar over here. And if I connect it over here, it reads 220. That means 220 of the monthly outcomes are in this interval. If I go all the way down, that will be the 0 to 2% interval, and we can verify that with the table also. And also, again, we can see that we have four tall bars over here, and it shows that the vast majority of the monthly outcomes are in these four intervals, and the intervals span from -2 up to 6%. What else? We can also see that when we pass the 12% mark over here, not many returns we have here, and if you notice some of the intervals, there is no bar on top of it. That means it has 0 observations in them. And also the other side, minus anything less than -12, not many returns also over here. And it kind of gives it like a symmetrical shape, and it has like a bell kind of shape, and we can see that better when we move to the Polygon chart. But over here it's also kind of visible. Now keep in mind, if we were analyzing, let's say this is monthly total returns, if we were analyzing the annual returns on the S&P 500, our histogram could look totally different. Now let's look at our frequency polygon. This chart helps us understand the distribution better, because the way we would make this chart, if you can remember, was that we would connect the midpoints of each interval so we can create a smoother line. That way we can see the distribution better. And as you can see here, we don't have the intervals anymore. We don't have the end points of intervals. We have the midpoints of each interval. So this -1, that means we are in the midpoint of -2 up to 0% interval. And as you can see, we have that symmetrical shape that I was talking about before. Over here, past the 12%. Again, we can verify that as the line flattens out, that means we don't have that many returns in these intervals. We have the same situation the other side, -12%, less than -12%. And over here, where the line peaks, that means we have the most of the returns in here, somewhere in these intervals. And if I, again, connect this one over here, that should read 220. That means 220 of the monthly outcomes is the most frequency, most of the absolute frequency in our interval. But again, if we connect it all the way down here, we should read 1% here, because that will be the midpoint between 0 to 2%, and that was the interval that contained the most number of returns, 220 monthly outcomes. Now the last graph, the last chart, would be cumulative absolute frequency graph. And here is when if we look for the 0 line, okay, 0%, that'll be here. If I go all the way here and then connect, that should read 396. That means 396 of the monthly outcomes are negative, less than 0, and that means the other way, 648 of the monthly outcomes are positive. The other thing that we mentioned in the cumulative absolute frequency graph was the slope of the line, and we mentioned that when we see the line, the slope of the line is changing and it's rising fast, it's becoming very steep. That means we have most of the observations in there, and when it kind of becomes flat, that means we don't have that many observations in these intervals. So obviously we have from here to here contains we have the most returns in these intervals from here to here, and over here again it's very much verifiable with the table. Over here we don't have that many returns. Over here as well, again the line, we can see it becomes flat relative to this one that is like very steep. And one last thing I should mention here is that here, as you can see, we have the cumulative absolute frequencies here, and sometimes you can have cumulative absolute frequencies. Sometimes you can have in the vertical line, you can have the cumulative relative frequencies. So that way you will deal with the percentage of the returns, and here we're talking about the cumulative absolute frequency. So if this was cumulative relative frequency, instead of 396, we would read, what was it, 37.93%. And when we are talking about this part, the positive returns, that would read to 62% of monthly outcomes that were positive, right? So it's okay. You can, use cumulative absolute frequency as your vertical line, as your, actually, what is it called? The x-axis, the y-axis, I'm sorry. The y-axis could be cumulative absolute frequency or cumulative relative frequency. Doesn't matter. It's just which way you're more comfortable, percentage or, the absolute frequencies.